is the most foundational theory in all of biology actually starting to crack? Hey everyone, let's jump right into this explainer. Today we're unpacking a really provocative panel discussion featuring scientists Michael Behe, John Lennox, and Stephen Meyer as they critique standard neo-Darwinism. Hosted by Peter Robinson at the Hoover Institution, this conversation brings together a biochemist, a mathematician, and a geophysicist to debate one of the biggest scientific frameworks we have.
We're going to explore how these three scholars argue that cutting-edge discoveries in paleontology, mathematics, and biology are actually challenging standard evolutionary theory. Now, you might be pretty familiar with the basics of evolution, but this explainer is going to look at the specific, highly technical objections raised by this panel and the alternative hypotheses they propose.
To keep things organized and impartial, here is our agenda. First, the Darwin debate. Second, mystery of the fossils. Third, the mathematics of life. Fourth, irreducible cellular complexity. Fifth, the intelligent design hypothesis. And finally, worldviews in collision.
All right, part one, the Darwin debate. We'll start with the overarching question posed to the panel about how Darwin's theories are holding up today.
The panel kicks things off with a fascinating historical comparison. Host Peter Robinson points out that ever since Albert Einstein drops his theory of relativity way back in 1905, observation after observation has basically just confirmed his work, right? Over time, Einstein has literally become easier to believe. But, and here's the kicker, Stephen Meyer, John Lennox, and Michael Behe assert that the exact opposite is happening with Charles Darwin. They're arguing that as we gather more and more data across all these different biological fields, standard Darwinian theory is actually getting harder to defend.
Moving right along to part two, mystery of the fossils.
We jump into the first major critique brought up by geophysicist Stephen Meyer, the mystery of the missing fossils. Now, Meyer points out that Darwin himself was actually super aware of this missing fossil problem back in 1859. The most famous example of this is the Cambrian Explosion. This is a wild event in the sedimentary rock column where major categories of totally new animal body plans just appear. And I mean abruptly. They completely lack any discernible connection to earlier, simpler ancestors.
So the crucial takeaway here is that instead of a slow, branching tree of life, which, is exactly what Darwin's theory expected to find, the panel argues that paleontology reveals something completely different. The fossil record actually looks a lot more like an orchard of separate, distinct trees. In this view, major groups of organisms just pop up out of nowhere. There are none of those countless connecting intermediate forms that random mutation and natural selection would absolutely require.
Let's see how this builds across the timeline. Meyer argues that this pattern of sudden, abrupt biological innovation repeats itself throughout all of geological history. We're talking from the incredibly fast leap from simple chemicals to complex cells nearly 4 billion years ago, right up to the sudden emergence of the genus Homo 2 million years ago. Even the cultural Big Bang of human art and agriculture around 40,000 years ago. At every major leap, the panel claims the gradual intermediate steps Darwin predicted, they're just missing. So if the fossils are missing, what about the DNA?
That brings us to part three, the mathematics of life.
Here's where Oxford mathematician John Lennox and Stephen Meyer tackle the staggering statistical improbabilities of life and new biological information forming purely by chance. Think about it. When it comes to building a new animal, you need new proteins, and proteins require incredibly precise genetic sequences. Meyer notes that the odds of randomly generating just one new functional protein sequence are astronomically low. We're talking 1 in 10 to the 37th power. To put that massive number into perspective, he compares it to searching for a single hidden needle in a haystack the size of the entire North American continent. Oh, and you're only allowed to search a tiny fraction of it. You are just overwhelmingly more likely to fail than to succeed.
The real heart of this mathematical problem lies in the structure of life itself. The 1953 discovery of DNA's structure showed us that life doesn't just operate on chemistry alone. It operates on a highly complex digital linguistic code. It literally functions exactly like computer software. Lennox argues that natural selection simply cannot explain the origin of this genetic code. Why? Because you can't just get from undirected random chemistry to highly specific sequenced information without completely destroying the function of the code you started with.
All right, part four, irreducible cellular complexity. Shifting gears from math to cellular biology, biochemist Michael Behe introduces our third scientific pillar, and this completely changes how we're forced to view the microscopic world.
Back in the 19th century, Darwin's contemporaries had pretty basic microscopes. They basically thought cells were just simple, tiny blobs of jelly. But Behe points out that 21st century science has revealed the exact opposite. When you look inside a cell today, you're essentially looking at a complex city. It is genuinely breathtaking. Life at this level is fundamentally run by highly sophisticated integrated molecular machines, electrical apparatuses, and transport vehicles.
To describe these tiny machines, Behe actually coined the term irreducible complexity. This refers to a complex, multi-part system where if you remove just one single part, the entire system completely stops functioning. So why does this matter to the debate? Well, because a blind, unguided process can't build something this complex gradually. The intermediate, incomplete stages would offer the organism absolutely zero survival advantage.
He uses this really vivid, everyday analogy of a mousetrap to explain it. Think about it. A mousetrap needs a base, a spring, a hammer, and a catch to work. You can't build it slowly, piece by random piece, over millions of years, and expect it to catch mice along the way. If you're missing the spring, it doesn't just catch fewer mice, it catches zero mice. Behe asks how a blind biological process could possibly preserve non-functioning, random mechanical pieces in a cell over eons, just waiting around for some future use.
And Behe actually uses Charles Darwin's own standard against him here. Darwin himself wrote back in 1859 that if any complex organ existed that could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, his theory would, in his words, absolutely break down. Behe asserts that the irreducibly complex molecular machines we find in modern cells represent the exact phenomenon Darwin was worried about.
So before we move forward into the philosophical side of things, let's quickly summarize the panel's findings. The three pillars of their scientific critique are: 1. The fossil record shows abrupt appearances rather than gradual branching. 2. The mathematical probability of randomly generating functional DNA code is just laughably small. And 3. The molecular machines running our cells are irreducibly complex. All of these together, they argue, point to severe limitations in the standard neo-Darwinian model.
Which brings us to part 5, the intelligent design hypothesis.
This brings up a critical juncture in the conversation. If undirected random processes can't fully explain the origin of life's complex information, how does this panel answer the mystery? Well, they propose the intelligent design hypothesis. Stephen Meyer argues for this using Darwin's own historical method of reasoning. Darwin believed that to explain events in the past, scientists should look for a cause now in operation. Meyer notes that in our uniform and repeated experience, the only cause now in operation capable of producing digital linguistic information is a conscious mind. Just like we know computer software comes from a programmer, the panel argues that the linguistic code of DNA acts as a positive scientific indicator of an intelligent agent's activity.
And finally, part 6, worldviews in collision. Now, the panel openly addresses the immense pushback they get from the academic establishment. And they frame this conflict not just as a disagreement over data, but as a massive philosophical clash of worldviews. To illustrate the dominant materialistic worldview in modern academia, they quote evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins. He asserts that the universe has the exact properties we should expect if there is no ultimate design, no purpose, and nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. For scientists holding this strict materialistic view, any hypothesis that even hints at a designer is just fundamentally out of bounds, no matter what the DNA actually looks like.
But in stark contrast, Cardinal Ratzinger represents the worldview held by the panel. This view argues that the very latest findings in microbiology and biochemistry don't prove a random universe at all, but actually illuminate a universe guided by intelligence. John Lennox points out that this is exactly how early scientific pioneers like Isaac Newton viewed their work. For them, discovering the laws of nature was seen as literally uncovering the mind of a creator.
This brings us to the absolute deepest philosophical stakes of the entire debate. Lennox returns to Darwin's own writings to highlight a profound dilemma, often called Darwin's doubt. You see, Darwin worried that if the human mind is merely the end product of a mindless, unguided, and blind evolutionary process, why should we trust our own rationality to understand the universe at all? Think about it. If rationality itself is just an illusion born of random mutations, the very foundation of science is completely undermined.
So we leave you with this final provocative thought from the panel. If strict, unguided materialism risks undermining the exact human rationality we rely on to do science in the first place, how should we proceed? Does true scientific inquiry require us to artificially limit our explanations only to blind nature? Or, as this panel strongly suggests, must we follow the evidence wherever it leads, even if that evidence points directly toward a designing intelligence? Let that sink in for a bit.